Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you that this is probably the interview I should be most prepared for, and yet I feel the most honored because I've known this gentleman for most, half, I don't know, somewhere around that of his life, and yet he is still surprising me. He is still just coming forward in my life. He's blessed my family. He's been a part of just who I've become as a person and a creative. Because Chris Alessi, as I'm introducing you, what you may not remember is I didn't even have this concept of God and gigs until I came to the church that we both work at, Metro Life Church. And so you are, in a sense, part of the reason why I am sitting here. So, Chris Alessi, welcome to the God and Gig Show. How are you, sir?
I'm great. I'm honored. That was sweet. I could say the same about you in so many ways, and I'm so glad to finally know that it's in fact a singular God, God and
Oh
gig,
gosh. Okay.
as
Did you
I
have
had
to
messed
bring that
it up
up?
for so many years.
You opened the door to this. You opened the door to this, to the fact that yet we work at the same church, and yet you accused me of pantheism and polytheism and
It was
having
a sin of
more than one
ignorance.
God in my God and Gigs podcast.
It was a sin of ignorance. It that's all it was.
Well, okay, this could turn into just a chat. So we have to be careful. There are people listening to us and watching us for the first time. So I always give the 30-second elevator pitch opportunity to each of my guests. I know it's really impossible to put your entire life into 30 seconds or so. But for those who are meeting you for the first time, can you kind of tell them who you are, what you're all about, and why you have something to offer?
Oh, absolutely. So my name is Chris. I have a beautiful wife, Rochelle. I get to work for my parents in the family business of our church, Pastor Steve and Mary, and I've started writing books the last couple of years because I just feel like our church has tapped into something, and other people don't have it. And so I just kind of feel like it's really not my content. It's not anything specific to me. It's just more like, man, we're in this gold mine of people that can pour into us, and I just got to get it to other people, and you're a large part of that. I mean, you and I have so many conversations when we should be working, but so many conversations while we're making coffee, and it just inspires me. And so if I have anything to offer, it's really just the environment of our church, and I'm just trying to make that available to as many people as possible.
Well, that is super humble of you, sir. After you have once again, um, you just drop so many bombs and nuggets every Sunday as I hear you preach. Again, full disclosure, everyone that's listening, we are members of the same church. If you didn't get that already, I work alongside. I won't call him Pastor Chris in this case, but in only in deference to his role here as an author, I will say Chris. Chris and I work together at Metro Life under his amazing parents. And I get to also work on the podcast where his family, the family business with the Alessis. I really do feel like, again, this is kind of where I've seen you walking into what your parents, Pastor Steve and Mary, have really just opened up. So that's a quick plug for the family business with the Alessis. If you want to hear what we're talking about, we can't really go that route right now, but they spell it all out. And you are absolutely a big part of that because you were, let's kind of go to the oldest, let's go to some psychology.
Let's
Being
do
the
it.
oldest child, being the first in this kind of family business, walking into this role in the church, in ministry, in everything, pretty much, you had to go first, right? So tell me just a little bit. And this is weird that I'm asking you this, but I think it's the first time I'm asking you this. What was it like? Was there any pressure on you as a son in this ministry family of being the first of everything, the first one to go into whatever, high school, college, write a book, sing, everything? Like, what was that like for you growing up?
Well, you said let's get into psychology. So luckily, my I have my bachelor's in it in
I
psychology.
wanted to
So
open the
perfect.
door. I opened the door. You're welcome, sir. Bring
It
that
was
college
actually,
education on.
yeah, and it was a big joke that for so many years when I'd preach, I'd say, and psychology says, and people just continue to bring that up and make fun. But the interesting thing is, it definitely was pressure filled. I would say though that my parents did a phenomenal job of not letting me feel the full brunt of it and the full weight of it. It started at 12 when our worship team didn't have our youth worship team didn't have a worship leader, and they were like, "Hey, you're going to do it." And I wasn't even a singer. I'm like, I didn't know I could sing or anything. And they were like, "You're going to do it." And I remember saying, "Well, I don't want to." And they're like, "Well, this is your first introduction to the world of you're doing it." And that just carried on to, I remember being 15 years old. And when we were buying our new building, my dad put me in a hole that they had dug right around the place that he would sit. And he had me put a Bible in that hole. And then they, of course, took me out of the hole before they filled it again. Pictures don't make it look that way. But it was an introduction to that I was going to be a large part of the future, and not just because of being the only male. I have three younger sisters. It wasn't only because I was first. It was because I had the biggest opportunity to lead my sisters to say that they were coming in it as well. And so it definitely started as kind of, I was a little alone in the whole thing, but man, they run faster than me now, and they have come on and they blow my mind in how they've found their lane, and they've become educated in that lane, and they're called to that lane, and they're so great. So luckily, I was the first for a little, but it wasn't that long. It became a team thing, which made it so much easier to not feel the pressure of being a pastor's kid, because having four of us, I was constantly sharing that with them. And one of the things that is cool about our work environment is you work with your son too. He's on staff with us. And I bring that up because it quickly became about the other staff kids as well. I wasn't in this alone. It was about all of us. And it created a world where I was grateful that I had that opportunity and that pressure. Now, there were definitely hardships, but it was crazy how over the course of time, looking at my life, when I graduated high school and seeing what my friends from high school went on to do versus what I went on to do, when I graduated college, seeing what those guys went on to do versus what I went on to do, it made me look back and say, the difference between me and them was that pressure.
Wow.
That was the difference. I had that pressure that kept me in line and created something in me, and they didn't. And I'm not taking shots at them. They're in the pressure cooker now, but I had that from 12 to 18.
Yeah,
And
time
it's
to get
just,
used to it.
I had time to get used to it. And I will say it was never my greatest burden, but it has become my greatest blessing.
Awesome. Wow. Okay. So this is why I wanted to open that door, because you walked into not only being the first one to, like you said, kind of leading your sisters along, but also this new area of writing books. Obviously, our fellow, your mom, my worship leader extraordinaire, Mary Alessi, and writing songs is just like her. Like, she was born and gifted and anointed in that. So I
Yeah.
know you also have this creative side in the music, but then the book writing, I want to kind of dig into. I had to actually wait. Let me do the product placement. I was ready, sir. I didn't even realize this was going to happen. But your first one
First
up
one,
next, which was written when? When did you write your first book?
I think I wrote that in 2018.
Okay, so about,
Maybe
yeah, like, as we're recording,
March
like, yeah, 4 years
2019.
ago. So that's why I wanted to jump into that, because you just talked about it. You got this lane of learning ministry under your parents, working in the church. But when did it become kind of like imperative to you to say, hey, there's this other creative lane, not music, not necessarily ministry, but writing, that I feel like I need to express myself? Because remember, we're talking to a lot of creatives who might
Yeah.
be in church right now, but they're like, oh, well, I don't do this. I don't do that. I don't do that. Where do I find my place to actually express what God has put in my heart? Clearly, you decided writing was one of them. So I'm just asking, like, how did that come about?
Well, I'm sure other authors would say, like, I've always liked writing and I always had a dream. None of that applies to me. I may have enjoyed writing more than other subjects, but that wasn't a thing. It really wasn't until I had taken over as the youth pastor at 19 years old. Why they let me do that, I don't know. But I guess, again, it was the pressure of we need somebody. So I took over the youth group and fell in love with it and did it for about 5 or 6 years, but realized I couldn't do it forever. Um, and when I started the process, the idea of having to pass that to somebody else, um, I became unbelievably nervous that the pressure you and I talked about had prepared me, and the next person wasn't going to have any of that. They were going to be thrown into a whole different fire. I was not prepared for it at 19, but I was more prepared for it than somebody who wouldn't have had the people around me, like the Pastor Armando is my youth pastor, who, I mean, it's to this day, I call him my youth pastor because he just poured so much into me and our conversations and conversations with guys like John. And, you know, I'm sitting back, and those aren't even some of the people that I would call my true mentors who aren't in our church, people that pour into me. I'm like, I've got this wealth. My mom, my grandmothers, who were all, I mean, just my grandfather. I have all of this into this one funnel of me, and I'm like, where's that going to go? And so when it came time for me to transition out, I started to write a letter to the guy who was going to be next. And that letter turned to be like 12, 13, 14 pages, because I was like, you know, there was this one conversation with Harrison Conley, and that changed me. He needs to know that. And there was this one conversation that I had with so-and-so, and then he needs to know that too. And as I'm doing it, I happened to come across a book that had just mentioned, if you're going to do it for one person, do it for everyone. And that just created this, maybe I need to do this for whoever would listen, whoever would want. And so I sat down and just was like, let me take this letter, let me break it up, and let me see what a book would look like. I had zero intention of being a guy who would write multiple books. It was really focused on, I need this person and the leaders in our church to know this stuff.
Yeah.
But very quickly, and this is what I think the creatives would like to know. A part of my story is that I was a worship leader and felt called to that. Like from 12 to that, 19 years of age, that's who I thought I was going to be. And it sounds ridiculous to talk about somebody so young thinking they know anything, but that's really what I felt. I thought I'd be a worship leader. So when I was asked to be a preacher, that was terrifying. I'm like, that's not what I'm good at. That's not what I know. But I started to see, as I stepped into that, God started to give me a grace for leading worship, because I couldn't have the time to pour myself into that the way that I had before. But God had graced it and continued to allow me to grow in that area while I was working on this preaching gift. And that took on such a life of its own that I even started to enjoy preaching so much more that I asked to stop being a part of the worship stuff. And that's when my parents came and told me, if you have a gift, you've got to use it.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because when I started to write books, it was like God gave me a grace for all three now. And I can't remember the passage exactly, but there's a verse that says God wants to bless all we undertake. And so many times we think we have just this one lane, this one area, this one thing. And if I tried to branch out and start something else, well, that other one will suffer.
Right.
And
It's
I
either
actually don't see
or
that.
thinking.
I don't see that at all. I've only seen in my life, when I stepped on to work on preaching, my worship leading got better. And when I stepped on into writing, my preaching and my worship leading, they all grew with it, to where now I don't think anybody would peg me as one of these three things. Yet there was a season of my life where I wanted to peg myself as just one of those. So hopefully that brings some level of value, because I just started to realize I wasn't practicing, I wasn't rehearsing, I wasn't able to give it that. Yet God continued to give the growth like he always does.
Yeah. I love the fact, I think about the fact that my phrase is always that God is a God of and, not or. He's
Yeah.
always mercy and grace. He's always, he's never or. Like he gives us choices of or, but he's never or. He's like, no, you can have them both, but you just need to follow me, see your kingdom of God, and all these things. Right. So I love it. Now, you opened the door there when you talked about the thought about how you pegged yourself as one of these things, because that obviously follows into your thought life. What did you think of yourself, your self-image? And so then later on, you get into I guess a series, I believe. If I remember, I saw the notes, I think you put on Instagram, of your first notation of this word clickbait. And I believe it was a sermon series or something that you were digging into. And lo and behold, 2 years, 3 years later, we see it's a book. But it all started from a thought. It's so crazy, right? Like God talks about, like, making sure that our thoughts are his thoughts are not our thoughts, but he gives us, right, these little inklings of things to start with. And that is where this book came from. So can you tell me a little bit about where the genesis of this idea for clickbait came from?
Yeah. It's probably more long-winded, and I need to find a way to shut it down, but it did come from struggle. It came from probably my greatest gift turning into my dark side. The way that I process and hear things, and maybe somebody even sees it now, is it's there's like a web of everything. And when God will speak, or I'm reading the Bible and there's a story, it connects to this web of other things. And that's why you and I really can get caught up talking for so long, because you work the same way, where it's like that touches this and that touches that and that touches this.
It's all interconnected. Like this, yeah.
And it's beautiful, but it can work the other way as well, where you can have a negative thought, you can believe a lie, and now it's touching everything. And it came into I came into a season where I heard a couple of things subconsciously about people that used to, or people from my ancestors, things. And for whatever reason, there was just a day where I had bought into these thoughts. And I luckily never bought into them at an identity level, but I did buy into them at a struggle level. Like, what do I do with these thoughts? And I remember talking to my parents about them, and they were helping me walk through them. And it sounds weirder than it is, but it was like, I remember hearing, one of my grandfathers, who was a creative and his life went pretty tragic. He ended up leaving his family. He left them. And for whatever reason, the fear of me doing that one day just came on me. And this is before I was married.
Wow.
The idea that I processed that too deep. And I thought, I think if you asked him at 30, would he ever do that? He would have said no. So then how do I proof my life from that ever happening?
Yeah.
And I just started to give into this fear of, there was an uncontrollable future like his, and it was terrifying to me. Well, long story short, I was watching Star Wars, and in the middle of Star Wars, in the middle of this, I believe it was Luke who says, "Be mindful of your thoughts, for they betray you." Now, and the minute he said that, all of my psychology background, everything about the word, about taking our captive every thought, all of that came together. And I paused the movie, I got up and I started writing, because it was like I was able to now look through in that little season of what felt like an identity crisis to some time, every single thought, and process through that. It was like I had a new lens to view it through. It was like, oh, my thoughts were trying to betray me. And it was beautiful, because in that, it was like God began to piece together all the different clickbaits that the enemy uses, the lies that we believe, that we think are normal. And sadly, it's normally because of somebody else's story that we hear.
Yeah.
Like it was with that, he is my grandfather, but I never really met him. Hearing about that had just scared me. And how crazy was it that there was this almost full-blown identity crisis because I was scared? That was it. If I would have heard that in a message, I wouldn't have believed it. Oh, you're giving into fear. No, I'm not. It's something deeper. Because when you buy into lies up here, when you buy into that clickbait, you really sit back and you convince yourself of a lie. And what I say in the book is, if lies were clear lies, if they were clearly lies, we wouldn't struggle with them. But the fact that they sound true, the fact that it makes sense that it happened to him, it could happen to me too. All of those things, they create struggle because they sound kind of true. So the book dives into the nature of truth, which this was not an attempt to be like, the world doesn't believe in absolute truth, so let's fix it. It was more like, dang, Christians are buying into lies. Let's help. And you can't do that without really diving into the nature of truth. So like I said, it's pretty long-winded, but
no, I think I love okay, number one, I gotta pull out a bunch of things I didn't even realize. And I love, again, we're doing the spider web thing, but it's because everything's connected. The fact that you got an idea for this book from a movie, from another creative, because we just said we're kind of we're both in the creative space. And yet we realize that we're being influenced even as we influence others. But it's what we do with that influence, right? You could take that same thought, turn it into something wrong. But you took that thought from a movie, which is not a Christian, right? It wasn't Luke Skywalker saying, Jesus is Lord. It was a phrase taken from that, Let's not even dig into the fact that George Lucas took the whole "May the Force be with you" from his Methodist background. Let's not even go there. But but I'm saying there's so many tendrils and things that connect. But the key is that you saw that thought life, that the way we think at the core level ends up being who we are. It almost happened to you, like you mentioned your grandfather. I'm going to tell the story only because this is recent in my mind and it sounds like it's totally off left, but I think it relates. I just heard a podcast talking about the person who was one of the first computer programmers. Her name was Ada Lovelace. So it's actually the daughter of this guy named Lord Byron, who was a crazy famous writer in English, in British literature. However, he was a horrible father. He was one of those guys that said, I can sleep with anybody I want, doesn't matter. So basically, he had no part in his daughter's life at all. Her mother said, no, I'm not going to have you close to me. She died at the same age as her father. And when she died, asked to be buried next to him. The fact is that no matter how far her mother tried to push that thought of her father being just like you mentioned, in her mind, it grew and grew. And even though she was a famous, smart mathematician, at the end of the day, she died as a compulsive gambler or something crazy, and still wanted that connection with a man she didn't even know, because the same thought that you just mentioned got in there somehow. And that's why I want to stick on this. And you talk about the 5 clickbaits, because whatever she bought into is a historical thing, right? It's not even biblical, but it's just fresh in my mind. It's just proof that if we're not careful, something can get inside that seed, a little inception idea, right?
I was just gonna say,
yeah, it is. But it's in a movie, it's fun and it's cool. In our lives, it can be deadly, it could be destructive. And I think you talk about that in the effects that each one of these clickbaits can have. They start, I think you say that in the book, they start innocently. They don't sound like world beaters or something that's going to kill you the first time you hear it. But at the end, it doesn't turn out that way.
Yeah, I think that, of course, what's the most dangerous parasite? A thought, the inception thing. Mm-hmm. And I really started to process this after the book. Of course, I wish I would have got this in the book, but I started to process this after. If the enemy is called the father of lies, and we realize he doesn't have the ability to kill anybody, he doesn't have the ability to, put his finger over a car in open traffic and throw it into your direction. He can't do any of those things. That means he's done everything he's done and accomplished everything he's accomplished, and his only tool in his tool belt was lying. That's it. Everything he's been able to do, everything he's been able to accomplish, he did with a lie. It is more impressive than a little shepherd boy taking out a giant with a stone. This enemy has gotten in and taken so much with lying. So that makes us say, okay, I should take it seriously.
Yeah.
I should take lies very seriously. And I think people think the enemy is the type of enemy who wants to kill them, because the Bible says it's kill, steal, and destroy, right?
Right.
But they think that means that he's trying to inject them with disease or whatever. No, he's a death by 1,000 cuts devil. I break down the different voices that I believe exist in the book. There's God's voice, which creates. We could see that from the very first. There's people's voice, which you come to find out people actually don't create any. People's voices can't create anything on
others. Yeah, I want to be careful about, because they're going to say that. But yeah, but I think we allow them to create things in our heads, but they can't. Those other voices around us.
They can't speak something over me. They can't curse me.
Right.
But my voice creates. My voice creates my life. Their voice can create their life, but it can't create mine. My voice mimics God, and it speaks and creates. And in that way, if I let people's voice get into my head and then I mimic what they say, now their voice has created because it's co-opted my voice. And the same thing happens to this last voice, that invisible voice. I hate to call it the enemy's voice, because I don't think he's got one. Maybe he does. He spoke to Jesus. But other than that, what I see is when we start to mimic these lies, we use our voice to speak these lies really over ourselves. Well, then they create, because our voice has the power to create. It's like what we talked about a couple of weeks ago with Ishmael. God says, I have to make a nation out of him because he's your offspring. And the promise was for your offspring, Abraham. In the same way, God's like, I have given you the power of life and death in your
Yep. Life in your
tongue.
tongue.
So if you use it, I can't say, okay, well, that voice right now won't create. I'll turn off the power to create. It's like, no, it does. So these lies, they start small, but the death by 1,000 cuts thing, when we start to say it, it's not about taking us out today. It's about using today to take us out tomorrow. And we have seen people that have lived their entire lives running from something only to ask to be buried next to it.
Yep.
And that's because over the long term, that death by 1,000 cuts thing, it really gets you. It's like that boiling a frog. You never even had a chance to know the water was hot enough to kill you.
No, because
And
how gradual it is.
I don't think anybody, and this is the last kind of hit home point here, I don't think anybody realized how much was at stake when Eve was talking to the serpent. I don't think anybody,
Most of all, Adam.
most of all Adam, I don't think anybody but God and the enemy knew what was at stake. In the same way, I don't think we realize just how much is at stake in our thought life. And that's why I wrote Clickbait, because we need to take our thoughts more seriously.
Why do you think? I love, you're right. We can dig into all these conversations. This is again one of those things that I wonder about. Why do you think that this area of thought life, we're using the phrase very freely right now, thought life, and what we do with our minds, when this obviously is where all of life happens in our minds, why do you think there's so few books like yours that address it? Because yours is the first book that I've heard really talk about the fact of how do you take captive those thoughts? How is the enemy actually trying to speak to you? We've seen things like, oh, don't look at it, don't do this sin, or don't do this sin, or try to conquer this sin by this. And we've always heard like the process after the fact. I had the thought, now let's deal with the action. You're dealing with it before the action begins. Why do you think that's so easy to overlook?
I think, I don't know, I've never actually thought about that, but I wonder if it's because every creative struggles with that moment of everybody knows this already, right before they
That's true.
put
That's
something
true.
out.
Yep.
And when you write a song, in the middle of writing the song, you're like, this is the greatest song that's ever been written, until it comes time to like release it. You always think your baby's cute until you compare it to other people's baby. And so I do think that there's an aspect of feeling like, once you start to get into, okay, now the world's going to see it, there's a personal struggle. And I also want to say, and I say this very humbly, I submit this, but the church has hurt a lot. The church has been robbed by Christian artists left and right who have bought into the, let me take all the Christian jargon out so it has a larger audience. And so many people have done that. Both books are Christian books written to people who know the Lord. They are not written to people who don't know the Lord. And both times I was told by many people to take all of that out so I have a larger audience. And I bring that up because I don't know if the world has anything that can help anybody with their thought life. Not at all. I don't think once you take the God out of it, I don't think you can address your thought life. And so I think the people may have set out to, but once they take the God out of it, it takes on something of its own. It becomes more about habits. It becomes more about
self-help and productivity, and do this to orient your life in the direction of your purpose, and all the other stuff. Sounds all really good. Again, kind of like you said, the clickbaits, right? It sounds good to figure out, to try to figure life out, until you realize you're doing it. Again, it sounds cliche, like you said, because it sounds like everybody knows it, but we keep doing the same thing, putting the ladder on the wrong wall, right? We keep climbing the ladder, but where are we going to? We didn't start from the foundation, like you said, of God, and of the foundation of where is truth, what is truth, and what voices are even responding to. So yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. And I think you don't have to be humble about it, because it's just facts. You're exactly right that even in the church, we tend to neglect. We take verses like that, take every thought captive, and my thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways. And we just kind of like say, okay, like we just take it as surface value versus thinking, oh, okay, what's the opposite of that? Well, if my thoughts are not your thoughts, well, then the devil's thoughts are not my thoughts either. Because God's like, nope, these aren't mine. I'm going to give them to you. But then the devil's like, okay, well, let me mimic, like you said, mimic God. And then let me insert some stuff in there. And we're still kind of blindly going through it as if we don't need to examine this. There's one verse, and I know we're going to go deep in this. I'll stop after this one. But you talk so much about how, especially in the self-diagnosis clickbait, which I'd love you to dig into just a little bit of each 5, because I know they got to go read the book to get into all 5. But you talk about the self-diagnosis, about how God knows us only, and we can't diagnose ourselves. I go to the verse where Paul says, I do not even judge myself, but he who judges me is the Lord. Paul, of all people, who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, like, I'm not qualified.
Nope.
I'm not qualified to judge myself. And yet in church and outside, like you mentioned, we all are trying to like figure this thing out by ourselves, and we think we have the solutions when we don't.
Yeah. And let me just add on, and I'll jump into the 5 clickbaits, but even people that are like, let me write, worship teams are doing this left and right. Let's write music that people can listen to in the car.
Yeah.
And it's like, look, that's not a bad thing. But at the same time, like, we have to realize, can you imagine if the disciples were walking around after Jesus ascended and they were going back and forth about the Great Commission, and they were like, hey, you know what? Let's take the Jesus stuff out of it, or let's take the resurrection part out of it. That's the part people aren't really responding to. And when you consider that Jesus preached tons of his own messages saying, half of y'all ain't going to hear this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then that the idea of trying to enlarge our audience, so I'll take stuff out, is literally the opposite of what God did. And a lot of people will look at the Bible and say, well, there are principles people will honor even if they don't accept the meta stuff. And it's like, you can't separate the two.
No.
When you try to separate the two, you're playing right into the enemy's hands, because that's what he's trying to do. He would love for us to honor biblical principles, but not honor God.
Wow.
He would love for us to think we're doing it right, when in reality we're not. And so to buy into those to jump into the clickbaits, none of them sound like world beaters. None of them sound like they're killing you. But the truth is, every book that I've ever read since I have been born, maybe there are tons of books before that, that weren't written this way, but they were written like there was one problem and one solution.
Yeah.
And I try to attack that in the book, because I'm like, there's not one thing wrong with us. There's hundreds of things wrong with us, hundreds of things wrong with me. And in 2 years, I'll have a whole new list of things I got to figure out. But that being said, when you look at just some of the areas where we struggle, and forgive me if I can't remember them off the top of my head, but there's the clickbait of self-diagnosis, which you referenced. When you realize just how careful doctors are to diagnose something, they will spend so much time to decide what something isn't before they tell you what it is. And yet we walk around as creatives and we self-diagnose our season. We self-diagnose our culture. We self-diagnose us. We self-diagnose other people's actions. Like, we somehow are these experts. And you know this in the gig world, like, so many people turn it into, I can't stay in this healthy church because they can't pay. And if I can't do this, well, then I can't provide for my family.
Right.
And I'm like, you know what? You may be right, but you just self-diagnosed something, when God literally said he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. He knows you need to feed your family more than you do. And yet people buy into it because they've diagnosed it based on their own understanding.
Yeah.
And I remember a sermon I heard by Francis Chan, who, he's here or there with a lot of stuff, but he made this statement. He goes, I don't wake up every day to contemplate my own thoughts. I wake up every day to contemplate God's thoughts. So it's like, why would I self-diagnose my situation myself? I'm the type of person that, or whatever. That's just me contemplating my own thoughts. So you have self-diagnosis, you have reminiscing. I think a lot of people like to reminisce, and it's beautiful. And we were kind of doing it earlier with like how this got started, and that's all great. But that can quickly turn into, I think there's value in my past. There's huge sections of even Christian counseling that are like, we're going to dive into your past.
Yeah, there's almost like a cult of that. Like,
Yeah, and I only see bad things happening to people when they look backwards. And I think it's because when you look at creatives, we really do mimic the power of God when we create something. You can only create something when you're looking forward, when you're using today to create a better tomorrow. I think the reason I say that is I think when we look back, even to reminisce, we completely rob ourselves and even God of the ability to create because we're just looking backwards.
looking back, yeah.
When you look at water, look, y'all, this is crazy. I've never really articulated this, but when you look at what it would take to turn a person into a pillar of salt, when they looked back, when you think about what that, you're robbing the person of all of their water to create this salt. And when you look at the life-giving properties, the creating properties of water, you could almost see like, you can almost see it. I'm not saying you do see it, but you can almost see this articulated in that story. When she looked back, she was robbed of her ability to get
Nourishment, yeah, everything that, yeah.
she was looking towards a better tomorrow, and she robbed herself of her ability to get there when she turned around and looked. So there's self-diagnosis, there's reminiscing, and then there's self-pity. I think all creatives get this. We create
We write songs or and make millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Hey,
No,
David did it.
exactly. No, well, true. And we're not going to mention any initials TS. But people who have made millions of dollars. But I mean, it is. I love the fact we went to reminiscing and self pity next to each other because we did kind of dig into the creators. This one I think is where it's very dangerous for me personally. I know you've talked about yourself also transparently in the book, where it seems like again digging into this emotional trauma. Darlene Check has this phrase that I actually put in my book: emotional fervor. You mentioned David. This up and down kind of. I was high, now I'm low, and it's like even David, who's a man after God's own heart, was constantly vacillating in this emotional fervor. Even when you talked about David at the end of the book, when he talks about, you know, why did he make this huge mistake with the census? Because there's this level of, well, I've gotta, you know, turn it all on me. It's all about me. It's all about who I can get. Can I number these people? I got to protect this all myself. It's all about me. And then Elijah, of course, which you mentioned in the book. So I think this one is also great for any kind of person, but especially creators, because we spend all of our lives, it seems, looking inward.
Yes, and rightfully so in some areas. But if we can create a song, a book, a business, a podcast, we can create a false reality too.
Yep.
And that's what self-pity does. It creates false realities. If you consider what, and I say this in the book, but what Peter would have said, 1 Peter 5, knowing, stand firm, resist the devil, stand firm, therefore, resisting the devil, standing firm in your faith, knowing that the same types of tribulations are being experienced by your brothers throughout the world. It's like, how I stand firm is by realizing my brother's going through it too. And it wasn't like your brother in the church next to you. It's like the person across the world. Yeah. It was a much larger perspective of this isn't a personal persecution. And when you look at how it's defined, self-pity as just obsessing over your own problems, I don't think a lot of people would sit there and go, you know what, that's what I've been doing. I've just been obsessing over my problems. But when you think about it, man, you're like, shoot, if you really were honest, you're like, I've begun to obsess over my problems. And I am blown away more and more by the detailed command of Paul to think about these things. And just how many things he lists out. The only time I can remember he ever does that is when he's listing the fruit of the Spirit or the fruit of the flesh or what love is. So when you consider the only other thing that he's like, let me give detailed attention to, like that, listing it, right, is the stuff we should be thinking about. And self-pity robs us of that. And I think there's a simple practice here. Man, when I think that I'm being mistreated and my life is hard, let me think about that doctor who has to go home after he lost a patient. Let me think about the 5 paramedics who saved my dad, but only because earlier that day they lost a man of the same exact age, same exact body structure, same everything. They have to live with that. I get to have my dad. They have to live with they lost somebody. Let me sit back and think before I start to really think my life is super busy as a 30-year-old. Let me think about what a father of three, one son's about to get married. He's handling a podcast while also handling another podcast while he got. Let me sit back.
Okay. Now you're literally baiting me into the self-pity I just dragged myself out of, sir. Thank you so much. You are the voice of the enemy right now. I rebuke you.
No. But for real,
just kidding. I love it.
Let
It's
me
hilarious.
consider that before I really buy into my life is hard. So that's self-pity. Offense is pretty much self-explanatory. For anybody listening to your podcast, I guarantee that they've heard this 100 times.
Well, no, in the music world and creativity in anything, I'm telling you, like, just all you got to do is just do one Facebook post about who didn't like my post. Who if you didn't support me, if you didn't do this, if you didn't buy my album, if you didn't see this, if you didn't do that. And like, when we have a list, and I love how you put it in the book. Again, I'm not giving anything away, but I love how you say what that really means, when you're setting yourself up in that position of offense, like what it's really saying about you versus what you're saying about them.
Yeah, you're labeling yourself as somebody worthy of forgiveness and labeling God's child, somebody else, as somebody unworthy of it. And that's dangerous. Just that right there. I have decided to label this person as unworthy of my forgiveness. And I know the minute we say that, the clickbait starts going off. What about this situation, that situation? There are really deep, serious issues of people that were taken advantage of. I mean, my own aunt has stories of in her worship career, and she sits and tells stories, and we're like, wow, people are nuts, man. In my first book, I put people are awesome until they aren't. And there's real painful issues. But I don't know if we can really win walking around labeling some people as unworthy of God's forgiveness. I just don't think that works. So offenses is there's a lot of room there because it separates us from the pack. And if it's not good for man to be alone, why do we keep trying to be alone?
Why do we let things separate us that aren't going to matter in the long run?
Aren't going to matter. And let's be honest, we'll forget about a couple of weeks later.
Yeah.
And honestly, most times we would forget about it if the person just came and said, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's the dumbest thing that we require. We've built a whole thing on. I need contrition before I can feel better. I need you to feel bad before I can feel better.
And ties it to them.
There's a whole lot of stuff there, but the last one is my favorite one, and I think we could do a whole podcast on it. But
we'll have to do a part 2.
But it is the clickbait of maybe, and it's seasons where we look at a gap between what God says we could have and what we have, and instead of being faithful and letting God fill it, we come up with ways to fill it ourselves. And we think we're Abraham, leaving everything God has called us to when we leave the first church, when in reality, God was like, I never told you to leave. And, that God card, when you're playing that God card, you're probably playing the maybe card as well. When you have to go in and say, well, God told me, or I've been praying about this, that's a manipulation tactic. And how many times do we play that? We play that on God sometimes. And there is a biblical example of somebody who did this, and I'll let people dive into it, but it's in the beginning of people, somebody who they just saw a gap between what God promised and what they had, and they decided to fill it for themselves. And I think when people read that one, it'll illuminate a lot of things where obedience isn't doing things we think God would get on board with, good things, even things God asked someone else to do.
Yeah.
Obedience is doing only what God asks me to do when he asks me to do it. So
powerful. All right, man. So there's something that I really want to make sure you get to. And again, the book is right here, right? I'm looking at it. I've been reading it. I've been helping podcast about it. So I am absolutely a fan of clickbait. No punches pulled, no trying to, what do they call it? I just forgot my train of thought. I don't have to apologize for promoting and talking about it. But there is something that does equate to my community that I really think is important. And that, and just, I don't want you to, again, you talk about solutions, but there's a huge part of your book about community, about why, and because the reason I'm bringing this up and why I want to make sure we land this before we end it is because so many artists and musicians and creators, we just mentioned before we got on about a lot of these people that unfortunately had the worst part of clickbait. They accepted a lie that their life was not worth anything, but yet they were making millions laugh. The list goes on and on and on of creative people we have lost early because they bought into some type of lie. And I guarantee you, almost every single time they were either surrounded by people who said they loved them and didn't love them, didn't tell them the truth, didn't hold them accountable, didn't say you're slipping down the slope, but you got all this prestige and love and, you know, so-called admiration around you, so everything must be cool. Meanwhile, you're watching somebody slip away. And so this is why I want you to talk to, especially the Christian artists. I mean, we're seeing it. I don't want to point out any names, but we're seeing it in major ministries, right? Where people who are not accountable to a group of Christian, but number one, the pastors, just say it right now, I'm giving away one part of it, who have a head, right? And have a community around them. Why is that so important for people who want to avoid falling for the trap of clickbait?
Yeah. Well, I say it this way. The village needs walls. It just does. And a lot of people say, you know, it takes a village, right? If you're going to raise a kid, it takes a village. Well, that village needs walls. It just does. I don't think as much as the village idea could get up and move, whenever they do land again, they put boundaries up. They have boundaries to it. We have a generation of people, and I hate using that term because it makes it seem like it's just the last 15 years, but you have heard this statement a lot lately, which is, you know, the church isn't the building, it's the people. And that's so beautiful. If only that were true. Like, wow, we would leave church on Sunday and be an even better Christian Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But that's not what people mean when they say that. They sadly mean I don't have to go to church. Like I can get this direct download from God. And sometimes I think church is less about the individual connection to God and more about me bringing the fruit of my individual connection to God to his house. Yeah. And it's not just money, it's joy. It's the fruit of the spirit. It's encouraging one another. It's how many other times do we have an environment that humbles us? So humble yourselves therefore under the mighty hand of God. Like that's not a command sometimes for some people.
No.
And when
and it wasn't singular either.
No.
He was talking to a group.
Talking to a group. Even the books that are written to a person were written to a person for the purposes of the community they were speaking to. And to go back to your specific question, when you consider that big famous verse about having our land healed, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sins and I'll heal their land. When you consider that is sandwiched between God accepting the physical gathering place that Solomon had built as his own home. And he even says, my eyes will be attentive to the prayers made in this place. There's woe be the person who decides to talk their way out of needing that.
Yeah.
Convincing themselves they don't need that. And I see the clickbait in it. I see the seemingly the logic in it. I think I can understand why people will do it, but when you start to get into the business of calling the things God calls holy, unholy, meaning God has called this thing holy, but I'm going to say it's not. Mm-hmm. There is a deeper level of sin because you're calling God a liar.
Yep.
You're saying he's wrong. And even worse than that, you're rejecting his order. And that, I think, is more important to God. All those things are more important than you being best friends with the pastor or being fully valued the way that you deserve.
Or
Because here's
singing every Sunday or
I'm
playing.
singing every Sunday. Because I will tell you the truth. I'm going to speak for my church. The most underappreciated person in our entire church is Pastor Steve.
Mm-hmm.
And so if he's at the top of the underappreciated, I'm pretty sure we could all be all right with the level of appreciation we receive.
Exactly.
So I think the village needs walls. And the last thing I'll say is this. I sit back and think when that prodigal son came to himself and is like, I got to go home, he knew where to go. What if his father had moved? What if his father had moved? Simple. I mean, we're not there anymore. There's value right now to when prodigals come home, they need to know where to
They
go.
know where to go. Wow, that's powerful. And I got to tell you again, this is another shameless plug. Second chapter in this book. I felt really weird writing this when I was writing to Christian musicians and artists. And the second chapter is stay connected to church. Like, no, I think it's first. Oh my gosh, I can't remember my own book. Is my second? It's my first chapter. Sorry, chapter 1. Wow, I forgot see, this happens. Once you start reading.
Because you're working on your next one.
Exactly. So I was like, what? This is 6 years ago. What did I write? The first chapter is staying connected to church. That's because of the heart of Metro, which again, everyone that's listening, we are coming from the same heart as fellow brothers in this ministry, as Pastor Chris being somebody that I follow as I follow his father. This is where that heart comes from, God and gigs. That's why it was so important that I finally have you on this show after 200 episodes. Let's not let that happen again. And there's so much connection. It's because we see the value of this. We don't just talk about it in terms of artists and creatives that like church is a crutch. That's the key why I wanted you to say that, because it echoes what I started this entire foundation of this this platform is. Stay connected to church, and then all the things, the creative things, the beautiful things in your life, your family, your career, all that will follow when you have the walls behind the village. Okay, so we could do this forever. This podcast cannot
you need to say one thing.
Okay,
you need to tell everybody what you said to me yesterday, but tie it into this about how God allowed a Roman kingdom. So when he came and said, my kingdom, we had a picture of it. Well,
wow. Okay. I don't know. You just said it. I told I was going to forget. I don't know how I'm going to tie this in, because now you just put me on the spot. I think, I will say like this. I'll say like in terms of industry, and there are two things. And again, I knew this would happen. I had to be careful. So I think what the key element is that there's always a type and shadow of everything, right? Hebrews says that the Old Testament was written as a type and shadow of things to come. And if you want to dig into all that, Christ, the sacrifice, all these things have a type and shadow. So I believe that God always says, you can't handle everything. Let me show you a type and shadow of the thing that I will eventually reveal to you in perfection in heaven. I'll give you a glimpse, right? I'll give you a type, a pattern. So I believe in a lot of ways, Jesus and our belief system sometimes has to be shown in a unholy, secular, whatever you want to call it, right? Culture where he's like, okay, you guys may not understand the kingdom, but let me show you a plant. Let me show you a seed. Let me show you a farm. Let me show you a kingdom. See this king, this is the way my kingdom operates, but like this, right? So he always takes the inferior and then shows it in a superior way, right?
Yeah.
So I really think that this is where we're talking about with you and your book, is that these thoughts that we're dealing with, it may sound like psychology, it may sound like principles, it may sound like something, but it goes to a deeper level. It goes to truth, and it always supersedes what you thought it was.
Yeah.
That little minuscule kind of, like I said, with the Roman roads, when I was talking about industry and Jesus knowing that there was going to need to be Roman roads for us to travel. And now we need the internet. Now we need Spotify. Now we need Amazon, right? Like Amazon might be making billions of dollars and spending it on weird things, but thank God you're using it to get your book out, right? So God allows these things, the foolish things, to confound the wise, right? So he allows us to use these tools to do the things that he wants us to do with them. And that's I hope I got it.
I bring it up because think about that. Seek first the kingdom and all these things will be added. It may not be the perfect kingdom of God to be, but the church is the type and shadow of the bride of Christ.
Yes.
We have to seek first that kingdom,
Yep.
and everything we want will be added. This is why everyone listening to God and Gigs is brilliant, because they listen to a brilliant man.
Oh gosh. Okay. See, okay,
You are.
I will stop you there. I will humbly say thank you and my pleasure, like I'm supposed to. But but first of all, let's make sure that you tell them how to find your book. You are, again, this is not the only thing you do, but it's all we can share right now. So just let them know, number one, how they can get a copy of Clickbait in all its different formats and how they can stay connected with you.
So it's on Amazon. They can get it, the Kindle version, the paperback version, or even the audiobook on Audible. It is my own voice, if they don't hate that. So they can go ahead and grab it on Amazon. My first book up next, which is really more written specifically to church leaders who are growing in the church. If you've got, a young adult or there's a youth worship leader or youth pastor, I'm telling you, this book would bless them. They can get that on my website. We're getting it on Amazon, but it's on my website, chrisalessi.com. And all of my socials are just Chris Alessi. So if you want to follow, just ChrisAlessi.
He is a great follower, and you will probably see a lot of posts saying that he is the favorite uncle, only uncle, but favorite of a certain young little niece.
Baby G.
But we'll let his sisters fight about that. Okay. Again, it's so hard to do it. Chris Alessi, I'll just say Chris Alessi. Thank you so much.
Favorite uncle of Baby G.
There it is. There. Okay, those of you who are missing it is on the podcast. You got to go to YouTube to see the photo. But follow Chris. You'll see all things. Okay. Thank you so much for being a part of this show, for being a part of my life, being part of my family. We're going to do this more often, obviously, because it's just too much fun and we can't keep it to one episode. So God bless you, my friend.
Thanks for having me.